What started as a Saturday morning coffee date turned into a podcast where we chat about things like faith, family, finances, and so much more.
We're just a husband and wife living this devoted life, and we're here to help you live this devoted life too.
If you enjoy this podcast and want to help support our ministry, there are a few things you can do.
Please subscribe to this podcast, leave us a review, and share these episodes with your friends so that you can help them live this devoted life too. Welcome to another episode of This Devoted Life podcast. We are excited to continue our homeschooling series that we started last week. It was kind of funny because I asked James if he was ready to record this podcast episode, and he was like, I don't even know what the topic is.
Yeah, I was like, do you have it written? Because I have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah. So we do have a good outline here, apparently that he has not read over a whole lot. So
no.
This is going to be raw commentary coming from James tonight.
And I'm fairly, hopefully this doesn't sound like braggy, but I'm usually pretty good at ad-libbing and kind of going with the flow. So
you can fake it till you make it, huh?
That's right. Yeah. No, I think we feed well off each other.
You do. Yeah. I mean, this is supposed to be a conversation between you and I that other people just get to listen to. So
I love it.
You're going to get some.
Our Saturday morning coffee dates, this is literally what we do. You might have a list, or I might have a list of things that we've been thinking over, or, been weighing on our minds, heavy or light or energizing or whatever. And that's what we do. We talk about it.
Exactly. So before we kind of jump into the topic of this episode, which is the pros and cons of homeschooling, the one thing that I want to make sure that we are very clear on is that there is no perfect schooling system. But we do believe that homeschooling is a really great option if that is something that you are considering. But as we go through this, you're going to see homeschooling is not the perfect choice either. And it is something that you're going to have to just really weigh and pray about and, just seek wisdom on because, while we believe that homeschooling is the best choice for our family right now, and I believe that it's a good choice for many families, even families that aren't homeschooling right now, I think there are a lot of people who may be called to that. Yeah. But it can be a little scary or overwhelming. But that is something that you need to prayerfully seek out. And we're not saying that this is the best thing for everybody.
Yeah, we are unapologetically pro homeschooling. So I don't want to sound wishy-washy at all whenever we make those kind of statements or disclaimers. It's more about, we just don't want to sound preachy, like you have to do this. And we also know that there's so many different circumstances for everyone. And so, your perfect might be different than our perfect. But I just wanted to make it clear. This is a wonderful path that really you've led us down and you've taken the initiative on. But, I just wanted to make it clear that we love it. And, Lord willing, we'll be able to do it for a long time.
Yeah. And we hope that we are encouraging to you to consider homeschooling because, like you just said, it is something that we really do love and enjoy doing. And even though it is hard, there's a lot of growth in hard.
For sure.
I love what Emma's for Mama says online and in her book. It's like hard is not the same thing as bad. Just because something is hard doesn't make it bad. And so that is something that you can apply into homeschooling too. So if you are one of those people who says, I could never homeschool, I hope that by the end of this episode, you might be going, maybe I could, So I guess we're going to dive into some of the pros. So the first one for me is just the freedom of time. So time is kind of like my love language. That's something that you and I have talked about a lot is if I want to feel valued, it's time spent together, time doing special things. It's less about what we're doing and just more about the quality time together.
And who we're doing it with and each other and our family. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And so that can feed into our homeschooling too. Yep. It offers a lot of freedom. So that's just one of the main reasons why we chose to homeschool. I was thinking about this. We do like to travel a lot, just because I feel like there's just such a big world that God has given us, and I want to see as much of it as I possibly can, Lord willing. But homeschooling allows us the freedom to go and do those things either in non-peak season or it's even something as simple as what was it? The other day, my parents were like, hey, can you come on over? And they live about 2 hours away. It was in the middle of a school week.
Yep.
And I took all the kids with our school stuff. This would have been like the end of last year. And we were able to go and spend a few days at my parents'. I think
Yep.
you were out of town, maybe is what it was.
Okay.
And I took all the kids down and, I mean, it was a lighter school day, but it traveled with us. I was able to read to them. We brought like our math books or whatever. And so there was a freedom within that we were able to go and do something that we would not have normally been able to do.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can't do that. Or you could still possibly do that, like if your kids were in school, but you'd have to pull them out. It's a lot more difficult. There's a little less freedom of time, within that.
Yeah. Speaking of travel real quick, I actually was thinking the other day, I feel like every time that we sit down and do another podcast, we always are saying, yeah, we just got back from here. We just got back from there. And I don't know if you're planning on talking about it in this podcast or, a future one, but you were at a conference last weekend and, traveling again. So the other day, I literally just randomly thought, yeah, we do quite a bit more traveling than we might even realize, but when you actually start writing it down. But again, that flexibility and just the ability to really just kind of let the flow happen and but stay on track with the schooling while we have those freedoms is a huge plus.
Yeah. And actually, I guess we can maybe take like a little segment here just to talk about the conference that I went to. Just a real quick plug for the Awaken Conference in Traverse City. It's a Charlotte Mason homeschool conference where a delectable education is there, and they are speaking and doing like immersions where you can just experience what a full day of school would look like for a Charlotte Mason student, or they will immerse you in like a specific topic. I went to one with Nicole Williams on science. And so I got to see what science should look like for all 4 forms of school. So that was just a really neat experience. It's a smaller conference, and what I love about that is that I come back just refreshed. Like there's a lot of meat to it. There's not a whole lot of frou-frou stuff going on at the conference, but it's very Christ-centered and just it really breathes life into our homeschool. And so whenever I come back from those conferences, I'm like ready to talk about it.
Yeah, very energized.
Yes. Yeah. So if you are looking for a really great Charlotte Mason conference and you want to travel, I know there's a lot of women who like traveled up, even like with their husbands, and came to the conference from several states away. So it's not just for Michiganders.
Yeah. Are there any good golf courses near there? Maybe next year we can
make it a family event.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess the other thing within the freedom of time, just real quick, is the less wasted time and more freedom to explore interests.
Yeah.
So, within just your normal school day, like if whether public school, private school, whatever, there can be a lot of wasted time. And I'm not saying there's not any, within homeschooling, especially with homeschooling toddlers and like with toddlers in tow, but between like changing classes and just like all of kids messing around or whatever. I mean, when you're in a group of, 20, 30 kids, it takes a while to settle them down, takes a while to get them all on task, or there's just a bunch of diversions throughout the school day. And for us, I have it will be 5th grader. I mean, and he will do a maximum of 3 hours of school in his day of like formal learning. And so there really is just this freedom and flexibility of time that allows our kids time to pursue interests beyond just the formal academics.
Yeah. And I think anytime you want to make something more efficient, you always look first, or at least I do, I look at the transitions first. So if you think about it, in homeschooling, you don't have to, ride the bus or drive to school. You don't have to ride the bus or drive home from school, go pick up the kids or whatever. You don't have to switch classrooms throughout the day. And there's just so many different transitions that if nothing else, you just eliminate those, you make that whole process so much more efficient. And that's just like one little thing. And, aside from, like you said, just getting everyone settled down, quiet, the varying just I don't know the right word for it, but the skill levels I guess not to be insensitive, but the IQ levels within a classroom and things like that. I mean, sometimes the teachers have to cater to certain students, here, there, and throughout that class, and not that that's a bad thing, and kids can learn from that and be helpful to others, but at the same time, you can really dial in on things, right? So
Yeah, you're actually like jumping ahead in notes.
I was afraid of that.
I
So
know.
literally, I almost said the risk here of not
Yes.
knowing what we're talking about is probably jumping around.
So we're
going
to come back to that
all right, fair
thought. We
enough.
definitely are coming back to that
Keep
one.
me on task.
So we're going to go on to the cons of the freedom of time.
And just real quick, we did not talk about that. So it
no,
sounds
we didn't.
like
We are on
yep.
the same page. Totally. And actually going back to what you just said with like the transitions, to be fair, I do know a lot of people who have children who are in a traditional school system who value those car rides because it is a time to talk with their children, and so there is...
There truly are pros and cons to
there
it all.
truly is. So it is... I guess it kind of boils down to it is what you make of it,
Yeah.
In a lot of situations, that's just the truth of it.
Yeah.
So, the same freedom can also be a con. So the freedom of time can also be a con if it is wasted time.
Yep.
It's possible to have too much freedom of time in homeschooling if you are not consistent in your schooling, if you have no structure or rhythm. You can't just take a dart and like throw it without looking at the dartboard and just like pray that it hits, like you do have to have some rhythm and some routine and some expectations within your homeschooling. And, even unschoolers, which we are not unschoolers, but even they have rhythms and routines and repetition and intentional learning times. So it doesn't mean that kids are left solely to themselves, but rather it gives the space to learn what is important to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's actually a quote by Simplicity Parenting, which is by Kim John Payne. And it says, "Meaning hides in repetition. We do this every day or every week because it matters. We are connected by this thing we do together. We matter to one another. In the tapestry of childhood, what stands out is not the splashy blown out trip to Disneyland, but the common threads that run throughout and repeat. The family dinners, nature walks, reading together at bedtime, Saturday morning pancakes. Like those are the things that our kids will remember. And so we're not just, within this freedom of time, just allowing chaos. We are being intentional with that time that we are given. And so a con that could potentially be is a wasted time within that freedom, because sometimes like it's even just as adults, we get a little bit of free time. How are we going to spend it? Am I going to just scroll my phone on social media for an hour, or am I going to go and, practice an instrument or, whatever?
Yep.
So
do some self-improvement.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we have to be careful with that freedom. And I'm not saying there's not a time and a place just to sit and veg, because I think there's value in that too. But we do have to be careful within homeschooling.
For sure.
To not
Well,
have
and honestly,
wasted time.
that's an opportunity to really dial in on discipline and making sure that you are staying on task and not having to be forced. So to me, that con can actually be a real positive because you are you have to be more intentional.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it kind of goes into what our next pro is going to be, which is control over what is being taught. As Christians, as Christian parents, we want to teach our children through a biblical worldview. And you're just not going to get that in a public school for sure.
Right,
and in a private school, you're still not necessarily in control of what is being taught either. You can vet it a little bit more with a private school, but you're still going to get variations even within a Christian faith.
And
with what's being taught.
That doesn't mean that you can't give your child a wide range of perspective, but you can give it to them in bite-sized pieces. And it kind of goes back to that Corey ten Boom story that you told, where what your child is strong enough to carry, at that time, where maybe a teacher at school doesn't, and again, they have to cater to the masses, if you will, even if it's, only 20 or 30 kids in a classroom, that's still a wide range in there. But so we're not talking about brainwashing here. We're talking about really being mindful of what they they can handle.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was in our Raising Brave Kids
Yeah.
episode is what I was talking when I mentioned the story of Corey Ten Boom. I think is the one that it was.
Episode 4.
Something like that.
All right,
We'll have to go back and
if
figure.
you haven't listened to them all, it's in there somewhere.
Yes, but going back to public school, they are teaching directly against what the Bible is saying.
Yeah.
So if you have students in the public school, you have to be so careful with being extra intentional.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you can't do that well, because I know that some parents have their kids in public school, but they have great relationships at home.
Yep.
They're talking about these things. They're making sure that their kids understand
It's kind of their
why
mission
we
field
believe.
and,
Yes, which, you mentioned the mission field. I do not believe in sending children into a mission field, because they are not equipped yet to go into a mission field. But as parents, we can still be supporting them through that by having good conversations, with them at home. So, I mean, that's just kind of my little 2 cents on the mission field thing.
Yeah, that could probably be its own podcast itself.
Yeah.
That whole topic. But
Yeah. So while we should not always seek to avoid these things, the ungodly things that they are seeing and hearing in a public or a private school, we need to use those as teaching moments. Homeschooling does offer us more control over that exposure, though. So that's just kind of one of the perks for us, is it just gives us a little bit more control over what they are being exposed to. Even if they are in an awesome, like, private Christian school or whatever, they're still going to be exposed to things that you're going to have to talk about, which, I mean, our kids are still exposed to things, even as homeschoolers, that we have to talk about.
Yeah, and again, you want them to be exposed to certain things and to talk about them, but in bite-sized pieces and more appropriate timing.
Yeah. And so once again, in the same vein, this can also become a con, because if we are now overprotecting our children from the world, we are almost sheltering them too much. I think you have mentioned like the greenhouse before, or the trees.
Yeah, the tree staking.
The tree staking. You have to be able to remove some of those stakes. Otherwise, their roots are going to be very shallow.
Yes.
And then when all of a sudden mommy and daddy are no longer there, they're not going to be supported anymore, and their roots are shallow, and they're going to succumb to the winds of life.
That first windstorm comes through and they just topple right over.
Yeah. So if kids have never been exposed to the evils of the world in an appropriate way, they won't learn how to combat it. So I guess that's kind of just how to wrap that up. So we talk about not parenting from a place of fear in our episode of Raising Brave Kids. And I think that applies very much to this right here, this con of you don't want to overprotect.
Yeah.
You need to seek God and have wisdom in what you are exposing your children to. Homeschooling is not to put them in a bubble or to bubble wrap them for their entire life and then just like sending them out into the world. It is so that we can intentionally teach our children and expose them at age appropriate and developmental times in their life to certain things.
For sure.
And it's going to be different with each kid, which is, a pro, I guess, that we'll talk about in a little bit. But
are you skipping ahead now?
I was about to. All right. So the next pro on the list that I have is we have the opportunity to positively impact our children's character. So as parents, we are ambassadors for Christ. How we act within our home, how we talk to our children, what we are exemplifying is what they are going to pick up. The more is caught than taught.
Yeah.
I think is what applies here. How we are living out our lives in front of our children is so important. And it is it's a pro within a Christian home, because we really have a chance.
Yeah.
And we get extra hours in our day to just teach our children Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah. You look like you're about to laugh about something.
No,
so go for it.
So I had a conversation with a guy at work today that I was talking about some of our children, and it was just funny because he said, well, he certainly picks that up from you. And I was just, you mentioned, how more is caught than taught. And like, I definitely don't teach our son what I was, and I'm not going to like go into the whole story, but I don't teach him those things. But is definitely how I think and how I approach things. So yeah, just
So,
kind
I
of
mean,
funny.
that can be a very positive thing. But
Yeah,
again, that can also be a very negative
sure.
thing
Yeah.
because,
And challenging and humbling and
yes.
yeah, all of that.
Yeah. So the con to that is we are not perfect. And
Right.
so our kids are going to pick up on our bad habits. Sometimes like they're talking and I'm like, where did you learn that? Oh, that was
That
me.
sounds like
That sounds
me.
like me.
That's mini Shanda
Yeah, it
talking.
sounds a lot worse coming out of your mouth than it did out of mine. And so it's
Right.
like
Yeah.
very humbling to have those moments where you're just like, oh, okay, that's a gut check. I need to be
Yeah.
working on me. And once again, kind of comes back to a pro is for homeschooling for me, like
Hmm.
it has been a very big growing time for myself because I see things in my kids and I'm like, oh, that's a reflection on what I've been doing. And
Sure.
I need to make a change too and to continue to grow
It
so
is.
that I
Yeah.
can lead them.
Yep. It's great self-reflection.
Yeah, that monkey see, monkey do. So we are not infallible. And so that is going to be a potential con is just you spend so much time together and they're going to pick up on, things.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
yep. So here we go. The pro that we keep alluding to, this big thing is that within homeschooling, and I think this is one of the coolest things, is that we get to customize our homeschool to each child.
Hmm.
If they are advanced in one area, you can just continue to let them excel and accelerate and
For
just to
sure.
keep diving in. There's no holding them back. You don't need to hold them back. Where if they're in a public school system or in just a traditional school system, you can only go so far, so fast
Right.
when you are having to teach, like you had said, to the masses.
Yeah.
And within homeschooling, we can just let them accelerate.
Yep.
And in the same vein, you can actually bring from behind those subjects that they are struggling in. And so it's like you can tailor every individual lesson to the child, which I
Right.
think is really neat.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many different avenues to go down here. One random thing is, the thought of pass or fail
Mhm.
in the normal traditional school setting, and I can't imagine that kids that get failed and held back fail equally at all subjects, right?
Right.
So it's like if your child struggles at math, that doesn't mean that they can't continue to excel and
Mhm.
grow in all of the other subjects. It's like, yeah, okay, focus on the math and try to get them up to speed, but don't take the foot off the accelerator on all the other topics
Right.
and subjects, if you will. So, yeah, I just, you can be more surgical
Mhm.
with your teaching and paint less with a broad brush and more
Mhm.
specific. So,
Yeah, and they're not failing. It
right.
might just be
Yeah.
something that they're struggling with. So
Yeah.
even that,
We don't use the word fail or never in
yeah,
this
we
household.
don't use fail or never. Well, it's just like if you're like, okay, you fail in this over and
Right,
over and
yeah.
over again. It's like, are they really failing, or are they lacking someone to motivate them to
Right.
do better,
Sure.
or someone to
Yeah.
come alongside them and say, hey, I see you're struggling. Can I
Right.
help you
Yeah.
with this? And it's like in homeschooling, we're able to do that so specifically to each child,
Yeah.
and it's more of a coming alongside and less of a you're doing this terribly, like you fail,
Right.
type
Yeah,
of thing.
beat 'em
So
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So each year I actually ask our kids, what can we do better this upcoming year? And which is what I love about homeschooling is that's part of the customization, right?
Mhm.
Like I want them to have input in their education because I want them to be lifelong learners. And so if
Yeah.
I'm giving them the opportunity right now to customize their education,
Right.
like what's your favorite subject? Our son blew me away and he said history this year. It's almost always been math, which is interesting because he told me that he loves history because he loves to read, which he does, and he likes to learn about
Yeah,
people.
which is really cool. Yeah.
But I picked up on that he didn't say math, and I do think it was because I was making lessons too long. And so that was something that I was like, okay, I think I need to shorten lessons for this upcoming year, and I need to customize that because I was making him plow through some pretty long lessons. And so I don't want him to hate math. And so this year we're going to make a change and we're going to set a timer and we're just going to keep lessons a little shorter and a little more bite size because I want him to keep the joy of learning.
Yeah.
I mean, I want him to be able to push through some hard, but I think it was just too much. And that's part of the customization is I'm able to watch my children and go, okay, this was working. And now
Yep.
something happened where it's changed a little bit. Math is no longer his favorite. Why is that? Is it because it got harder? I don't think that's what it is, because he was still doing really well
Yeah.
on all of his stuff. It was literally just he was spending too much time and maybe a little too much busy work, you know?
Yeah. And if you think about it, in life, there's customer surveys, there's debriefs, there's lessons learned meetings and things like that, exercises. And that gives the child some buy-in in the
Yes.
system and how to move forward. And so just inherently and not that you have to like empower or give them power per se, but it does. I mean, to me, it's like if I'm heard and then there's an actual change that is implemented because of them hearing me, that makes a difference. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that helps me want to do better and to grow and to kind of lean in and actually progress more rapidly. So
Yeah.
I think it's a real positive.
Oh, it definitely is. And I realized I never really answered the question that I asked at first was, what can we do better this upcoming school year?
Hmm.
When I asked my son that last year, he said snacks. Like snacks was his answer. And I was
Snacks were really lacking in 2022
apparently.
or 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, he said, he was like, I was like, snacks, really? I was like, I mean, you eat all the time. And he said, well, I would like to be able to eat something while I'm working. And I was like, well, that's an easy fix.
Yeah.
If that's something that gives you buy-in and makes school like happy for you, like, sure, we can have some snacks,
So what was your favorite snack in your lunches as a child?
Oh,
Talk about put you on the
you
spot.
did.
Yeah.
I honestly don't remember most of my lunches, to be totally
No?
honest. No. So I always remember getting the Bosco sticks like in the lunch line,
Really?
but those
Yeah.
were like the highlight, the pinnacle of lunches.
So I
but
went to a small private school and we didn't
no
have
Bosco
lunches.
sticks for
and
you.
No, but and it's funny because, and this is no knock on my parents or anything, but I definitely didn't have like a steady diet of healthy lunches.
Okay.
So, but I remember whenever I got some Dunkaroos, I loved Dunkaroos. I would even trade other kids different foods to get their Dunkaroos.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, I just
Yeah.
learned something new
You
about
did.
little
You didn't.
James.
There you go.
That's
You learned
so
it with the
cute.
world.
Yes. All right. So, I think we talked enough about that pro. So going on to the con of this is, we want our kids to have buy-in, but we also don't want to make our homeschool all about making the child happy
Right.
either.
Yep.
So once again, this pendulum can swing one way or the other, and it can go from really good to like bad in
Yeah.
the same
You have
token.
to stay balanced.
You do. There has to
Yep.
be a balance to it. And so we don't want to think that if just because the child's not happy with what's going on
Yep.
doesn't mean you have to, switch up curriculums or just quit school altogether, or it doesn't mean that you're even a bad homeschooler. Like
Right.
it doesn't even mean that. It just means that either they need a heart check, where maybe there's more of a character issue going on than actually anything that's going on with your homeschool. So maybe you need a character, more lessons on character.
Yep. Yep.
I guess maybe I'm going to back that up, because sometimes when there is a character issue, you also don't want to like completely
Yeah, you
hound
don't
on
wanna
that either.
hammer
So
in
when I'm
on it,
saying
but
more lessons
yeah.
on character, maybe just more of an intentional focus.
Yeah,
on,
and basically, you don't want them entitled or lazy or a bad work ethic. Because
Exactly.
obviously, if you say, well, do you want to do school today or not? Like, okay,
No.
pretty much 99.9%, are going to say absolutely not. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about genuine feedback, genuine, just interaction with your child, and that can really go a long ways. That just the open communication,
Right.
But if they're having a bad attitude, things like that, it's like no, you have to stay on track and keep on.
Yeah.
with it. Yep.
Yeah. It's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows,
Yeah, exactly.
but,
Yep.
for our son, like on the days where he's really grumpy and he's just like, I don't want to do school. And I'm like, okay, why?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to play.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, fair enough. I think we all would rather just play. Like I would rather be playing than doing the dishes and the laundry and whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just,
Recess
that
all
is a
day.
valid feeling, but that's not real life,
Right.
So that is, I think, one of the cons that we just need to be
Yeah.
cognizant of, because I do know a lot of people who are, or maybe I shouldn't say a lot of people. There are people that I have seen who will jump around from curriculum to curriculum to curriculum to curriculum because they're
Yeah.
like, this just isn't working. My child doesn't like this. And it's
Yeah.
like, is the curriculum actually not working for your family? Or is there another issue
Yeah, do you
that's
have to
going
push
on?
through the dip on that or
Yeah.
whatever? Again, nothing's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And,
And I'm not saying that you will never switch curriculum because I actually did that. It would have been 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
our daughter's first year in school, I noticed that she had some markers for dyslexia. And as I was teaching her to read, and I still don't know 100% if she does, but there's a little bit there. If she does, it's a very mild case. But I noticed that the curriculum I was using for her for language arts just was not working. It worked for the first couple weeks, and then everything was just getting jumbled in her brain. And halfway through the school year, I went, this is not working. I have tried this long enough now to know her brain does not think like this.
Yep.
I thought it was going to work. I was super excited about it. It didn't work. And so we pivoted halfway through the school year and we jumped to something totally different. And now, a full year and a half using this other curriculum, she's now
Made
reading.
great strides.
Okay. She's made great strides, and so.
You actually have a YouTube video that kind of talks about some of that, don't you?
Yeah. So I actually talked about the 100 Gentle Lessons in Sight and Sound that I was using with her, which is a language arts curriculum for early readers from A Gentle Feast. Yeah. And it's a great curriculum, but it just did not work for her.
Right.
And it was one of those things that I had to jump ship. It just was not enough phonics for someone who has dyslexia to decode.
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to jump on the YouTube channel.
Yep.
And the YouTube.
The YouTube.
Yep, and check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So now we're going to go back to another pro. So we kind of talked about the cons of just like letting your children make the decisions in the homeschool. But now we're going to focus on the life skills they can learn through homeschooling. Yeah. We hear more and more in traditional school that like classes like home ec or like welding class or
any of the skilled
trades are being pulled from the schools. Now, I'm not saying all schools are like that. I just have heard from numerous people that
there's quite a few.
Their public schools are pulling that. Yep. We do live in a really awesome area where there are a lot of STEM things going on in our area, which is great.
It is.
But they're not being taught like how to balance a bank account, how to write a check, how to literally make a list and go to the grocery store and buy things.
Yeah. You mean the government's not just going to bail us out of everything? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Ooh, you went there.
We have to be accountable for our actions?
We do. What?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so like our kids nowadays just seem to be lacking life skills.
Yep.
It's kind of hard to see actually where there's just, they don't know how to interact face to face with people. They're so, set on looking at a screen. They're really losing touch with just basic life skills. And so within our homeschooling, we are able to put an emphasis back on some of those skills, whether you are cooking with your kids, taking them to the grocery store, teaching them how to balance a checking account, letting them come up with business ideas. And these are all things you can do when your kids are in school. So I want to be clear about that. But we have more time when homeschooling to focus on some of those things, and, I guess one of the things that we've been doing, like we garden. I think our son and I just canned pickles yesterday, and he had never done that before. So he got to see how to do that. But if you personally, as the parent, don't have those skills, A, you can learn them, or B, if you are involved in a local church, I can guarantee there is a sweet little old lady in your church who would love to teach your child how to quilt or how to can or how to make jam or how to bake bread or whatever skill you think you are lacking. There is someone out there that you would not only gain from them, but you would be a blessing to them.
You want to learn something new about me again?
Yes, I would love this.
That you've never heard, probably.
Oh,
so there was this sweet old lady. She was a friend of my mom's in our church, and she made dilly beans. And I loved dilly beans, and so you probably know that. But did you know that my mom actually took me over to her house one time, and we made dilly beans. We canned dilly beans
Oh,
together.
that's so fun.
Yeah.
And we have so many beans in the freezer right now. And I was like, I need to make some dilly beans. So
Well,
maybe you
there
are
we
going to be the
go.
one to make the dilly
Sounds
beans.
good. Sign me up.
Because I actually don't know how to make them. I was going to look up a recipe.
When's the next home ec class?
Tomorrow night.
Yeah, so those are things where it's very good. Like you said, there are people around you. There's people in your communities. There's people at church. There's people, or there's co-ops, or whatever it might be. A lot of resources. So don't be disheartened because I don't know how to do any of this, and now I'm failing my kids or whatever. There's that word again. You can't use fail. But we are ever more not knowing where our food's coming from. And what to me is a little tough is the environmental and I don't know, other movements use that as like kind of an agenda and a bad thing, right?
You're saying
So-
cow farts aren't ruining our ozone
Yeah,
layer?
we don't use the word fart either in this house yet. No, but yes, those are things. And so all of a sudden now, not only do people not realize where their food's coming from, but all meat's bad and all this is bad and whatnot. And, I'm not saying that there aren't better ways of, I don't think I really want my chicken grown in a laboratory and things like that. But don't associate, be more cognizant of teaching your kids that just because you hear this and it is associated with that doesn't mean that that is bad. And so teach them how to hunt and how to maybe be a hunter-gatherer or do a garden or whatever, and kind of support your local farmers and things like that. That farm-to-table type analogy where you can learn so much, and it can be part of homeschooling.
Yeah.
And just again, you don't know the influences that are being put on your kids in a more traditional school setting.
Yeah, and just to be able to think logically through something, just having that skill, which is a life skill, to be able to test the information that they're taking in and to say, oh, I don't know, like this sounds good, but is it actually true?
Exactly.
Because there's a lot of things that sound good that aren't necessarily true.
It's that critical thinking.
Yeah.
And again, even if your kid goes to a public school and you choose not to do homeschooling, I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you're maybe considering or people that do it and are curious. But these things still start in the home.
Oh, most definitely.
If nothing else, just as a family, as a parent, make sure your kids are getting these critical thinking skills.
Yeah. And just when we are homeschooling, it just gives us more time to do these things. Really is just part of the freedom of it. Yeah.
Major pro.
The major pro. Yeah. And so the con there, if you didn't quite catch it, was just if you feel like you are ill-equipped to teach those things. So really that con kind of turned into a pro where you can bring other people into it and learn the skill yourself.
For sure.
So I cannot tell you the number of things that I have learned as a person simply from homeschooling my children. I've learned a ton more skills and just re-going through a different type of education than what I had in a public school system. I am learning all kinds of things. And I hate to say it like this, but I wish I was taught like how I'm teaching my children, and I would have retained a whole lot more, I believe.
For sure.
So, I guess it'll be yet to be seen with our kids, but I think they're retaining more than I ever did. All right, moving on to our last pro and con is physical health. So especially in these young years, our kids are able to spend so much more time playing.
Yes.
They are able to be outside, climbing trees, building forts, doing all the things because they're not within a classroom for 8 hours a day. And I'm not saying that, your kids can't have those experiences again, but it just allows more time and more freedom to do those things. So physical health.
It's a lot more intentional too.
Yeah, they're getting more sunshine. I didn't write any stats down on this, but it is crazy to me the amount of information that is out there on the benefits of being outside, getting sun exposure. One interesting thing is if your your kids need an hour of sunlight in the morning specifically, because what it does is it lengthens I think it's the rods and cones of your eye, and actually gives you better eyesight, which is why we're seeing so many kids with glasses now, because they're not getting proper sun exposure. There's something to that morning sun, like the slant of the rays, that actually causes their eyes to develop differently and gives better eyesight in the long run. So just that the overall health of your child, just being able to be outside and playing and doing those things. And then once you get into school age, like, okay, my son he will be 5th grade. He will lay upside down on the couch and read, and it's like, he couldn't do that in school without being like, sit down with your feet on the floor, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's actually something to that when they are able to physically do things while learning, that they will then retain the information better. Even just being outside, like the vestibular senses is heightened.
Yeah.
They do that for a reason. It looks completely silly, but the toddler rolling around on the floor is actually like doing something with their balance.
For sure. Yeah.
And so allowing our students to be able to do that within the classroom. So my daughter, who I think has some dyslexia, I was actually just talking with a friend today, and she told me, she said, kids who have dyslexia, if they are doing something while learning how to read, where there is a physical motion with it, they can learn better. They will retain it because there's not just the one-sidedness.
And she's a trained professional teacher.
She's actually she's actually trained in dyslexia, believe it or
Is
not,
she
too.
really?
Yeah. So
Yep.
she said, this is just a total tangent, but she said with students who have dyslexia, if they're right-handed, if they literally cross over to the left side of their body and point, like she said, like have them draw a word in the air or whatever. She said there is actually something with the right and the left brain where if they take their right arm and cross it over to the left, it does some crazy like connections up in the brain. So that physical movement adds to the overall health. So like our daughter, when she was practicing her spelling words, I'd have her on a wobble board, and every letter she would wobble back and forth, back and forth, back and forth as she was spelling. And that helped her retain. And it's like all of these things that the kids can do, and when they're not confined to a seat, not only helps them physically, but it actually helps them mentally as well, because there's a lot of tactile learners when they're able to move, and it solidifies in their brain what they're learning, So it's very fascinating. And, and once again, this could be a con, because within homeschools, we don't have a gym. We don't have gym teachers, and so sometimes if you are not intentional with it in homeschooling, and I think that's kind of what it comes back. Pretty much all the cons are if you aren't intentional in these areas, it could become a con. So if I'm not intentional with making sure that my children are getting outside and getting exercise and getting exposed to sunlight, or I'm not intentional with saying, hey, I want you to like do 10 push-ups between lessons just to kind of get your body moving again. If I'm not intentional with those things, then it can really slide into a slavousness, just like really lazy
and not moving, not getting that exercise because you don't have to get out of the house and get out of your jammies, per se. Yeah. So there really are just so many pros and cons to homeschooling. I do think that the pros far outweigh the cons. I was trying to find this back and forth of pros and cons. I could probably list a million more pros for this, just the closeness that you get as a family, because when you spend time together, you are going to create a bond. And, I think you've said before, like you become like the sum of the closest 6 people around you. And when you're homeschooling, I mean, we have a family of 6. Right. Yeah. It's actually
like
5, but I'm sure Jim Rohn or whoever wouldn't mind if it was 6.
Wouldn't mind if it's 6. Okay. So,
but and I think with all of these cons too, they actually, again, I know we kind of, did the antithesis of each and, made sure that we looked at it from kind of like that 30,000 foot view and tried to challenge ourselves on, what is a pro, what is a con, and, how they kind of affect each other. But each con really, like you said, the pros not only outweigh the cons in our minds by far, but they also probably aren't really that much of a con. It's just an opportunity to really dial in on it and overcome maybe that little challenge, but every problem is an opportunity,
Right.
and that's kind of how I view that in life in general. But each of those things are relatively easily overcome
Hmm.
if you just, like, we've used the word intentional quite a bit in here, but again, not to overuse it, but if you are a little more intentional, you can easily overcome that con.
Yes.
So there's just probably a lot of pros and a few opportunities in
Hmm.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about some of the misconceptions within homeschooling in
Mhm.
our previous episode. So
Yeah.
I didn't even bring up what many people would consider a con, like the socialization aspect
Sure.
of it. I
Yeah.
didn't bring any of those up
Which
because we
that's
already
been
talked about it.
easily debunked too.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So all of those things are great. But again, good perspective, and hopefully this is fodder for your
Yeah.
mind in trying to figure out, where it, or maybe even if you. So let me finish that thought. Try to figure out if you want to homeschool,
Hmm.
or if maybe you are homeschooling and you're starting to kind of teeter on, maybe stopping, or just you're getting frustrated and it's coming up on a new school year. Should we send our child to school, or, and that's your choice. But there's just so many pros
Hmm.
that, I'd encourage you to really exhaust all the options,
Yeah.
because, yeah,
And I do
it's
think that
good.
this would be fair to talk about right now is like the clashing of personalities within a homeschool,
Hmm.
because that can be viewed as a con.
Sure. Yeah.
Because it's hard, like just it's downright hard
Yeah.
sometimes. Like when you
If I don't
are
get along with my teacher, who is my mom, who
exactly.
no,
Well, I
or
mean,
my
it's
dad.
hard
Yep.
to find that balance between your mom and your teacher hat,
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what I talked about in the previous episode is
Hmm.
just that I found that homeschooling and teaching was actually just an extension of my parenting
Hmm.
because as parents we're already are called to teach our children,
Yep.
in the ways of the Lord. And so when we're just adding in like the math and
Hmm.
language arts and whatever else, that is just an extension of what we're already called to as
Yeah.
parents. And I don't want to minimize though the fact that it can be really hard when you
Yeah.
and a child clash
Yep.
personality wise. But once again, like you said, that con really can be spun as a pro
Yep.
because if you are intentional with it, it will in the end strengthen your relationship.
Yep.
It will build both of you in character.
Yep.
And we had some really hard seasons that we pushed through. And I am so glad that we pushed through because there were
Yep.
several times where I was like, I just kind of want to throw in the towel.
Yep.
I've never regretted sticking it out
Yeah.
ever.
In pushing through, like you said, there were some serious challenges, and probably will be more in the future. But we very prayerfully considered, sending our son at least to hybrid,
Mhm.
some classes, and probably would have if the school had opening. So
Mhm. God
we
completely
yeah,
closed that
God
door.
completely answered that prayer and closed that door. And now, in hindsight, really glad that He did.
Mhm.
So again, we're not coming from a place of getting up on our pedestal and saying like, "You have
Homeschool's
to do
only
this. It's
awesome.
only awesome. This is amazing." If you are doubting it, you're no, those are all very real things. And
Mhm.
again, things that we have gone through in the
And
past.
wrestled with. Yeah.
And like I said, we'll probably go through in the future. So hopefully this is some encouragement. And, if you have exhausted all options and things like that, again, we're not saying you can't, you send one of your children to school or not, but it's like, man, sometimes, pushing through the dip and overcome, or just embracing the grind is
Mhm.
worth it.
Yeah.
It's so much more satisfying in the end.
Yeah,
So,
it was funny. So I got together with a friend today, this one that she specializes in dyslexia. And I told her, I was like, whoo, this morning was a little rough getting out of the house. And I said, I literally walked into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and I went, okay, good teaching moments, opportunity for growth, and I just was like trying to like talk myself up on
were you
this.
doing
And
affirmations?
well, yeah.
I thought you were not an
I'm not an
affirmation
affirmation person,
person.
but I was just reminding
No, that's
myself
awesome.
that
Yeah.
as a parent, this is not what I have to just like push through, but
Right.
this is
Yeah.
what I'm given opportunities.
Yeah.
And
Sounds
that's
like a
what,
miracle morning.
yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. But no, all of those cons are just opportunities for
Yeah.
growth.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Good
both for the
stuff.
kids and for us.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, so I hope that this was helpful to you. Like I said, there's probably a bajillion more pros that I can list, and maybe even several more cons, but this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but I hope that this was encouraging to you and that in the end you're like, maybe I can homeschool and maybe I want to consider this and just take a look and see what this would look like for our family.
Yeah, a little boost of encouragement.
Yep. So until next time, we want to encourage you to continue to seek God, love your spouse, hug your kids, and stay devoted. Thank you for tuning in to this Devoted Life podcast with James and Shanda. We appreciate your support in sharing biblical, uplifting truths with the world. If you found value in this episode, please leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us to improve the show, and we'd love to hear from you. Be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more about how to live a life devoted to God and family, head over to thisdevotedlife.com. You can also follow me, Shanda, on Instagram at devoted_motherhood. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time on This Devoted Life podcast.